Hello, Natasha.
Hello, Damien.
It's the Lowbrow Lowdown.
Should we get into this book?
We should, because it's like already 8:30.
Oh my god, it's going to be here all night. Hello, listeners.
Hello.
Sorry, and please excuse my voice. I've had a cold, so I sound a lot sexier than normal.
It's not COVID, don't worry.
It's not COVID. No, it really isn't COVID. I got tested twice because I feared the worst. Welcome to episode 14. Wait, I haven't introduced myself. I'm Natasha.
And I'm Damien.
Welcome to episode 14 of the Lowbrow Lowdown. We are reading pandemic-themed literature, so you don't have to. Sorry, I took your line, Damien. I do that all the time. So, pronouncing the name correctly, Damien, what's this book about?
So today we are reading the Rotten... Oh, God. It begins.
It's like, riddle me this.
Jesus. The Rotten Roots of Yggdrasil. Mythology meets reality in Sweden's COVID-19 pandemic by... Now, I'm going to assume Louis...
I'm going to say a Louis as well.
Yeah, Louis Paul Delgado de Medoza. So, the blurb reads, a stark tale of Sweden's pandemic strategy told by forgotten gods. Stockholm, spring 2020.
Or for those of us in the Southern Hemisphere, autumn 2020.
Yes, very helpful. While Europe is holding its breath and most countries are beginning to implement lockdown measures in the face of the novel virus, Sweden is pursuing a controversial, much more lax strategy in the hope of achieving herd immunity.
We will address this.
Yes. Against this backdrop, the Old Norse gods begin to awaken from a long slumber, their dreams plagued with unsettling memories in a country that denies the darkest parts of its history. Loki will exploit the current circumstances to strike out against an elderly Odin, bedridden and fighting for his life. Thor, Odin, Tyr, and other gods of Asgard will have to battle a prophecy from the beginning of time, as well as a collective modern-day amnesia into which they have emerged. The Rotten Roots of Yggdrasil is a Nordic magical realism tale, ancient Scandinavian mythology interweaved with a tragic contemporary context and candidly shining a light on the lesser-known side of a country idealised within and beyond its borders. A paradise growing on a tree with rotten roots.
Yeah.
It's... so...
I didn't write many notes about, and we've spoken about this, I didn't write many notes about the plot or the characters, because I just enjoyed reading it so much and I thought everyone else should also do the same. And I did do lots of Wikipedia, sorry, I've got to get closer to the microphone, I did do lots of Wikipedia research, inverted commas.
Yes.
About the, about Yggdrasil. I didn't know what Yggdrasil was, but once it was explained, I was like, oh yeah, of course, that's what it is. And it features heavily in quite a lot of different Norse mythology, including Danish and Swedish and other Scandinavian countries.
Well, and a lot of people will recognise elements of that Norse mythology in like a lot of other things.
Stories,
like it really is huge in that Marvel universe, even before the films. Like Thor was a Marvel superhero, Loki was a Marvel supervillain for a really long time. Like Norse, as with any mythology, like they're embedded in everything.
Yeah, and then they're embedded in. The stories repeat across different cultures. Like, as you have a world tree or a tree of life exists in non-Norse mythology.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was interesting, the myth of...
Well, so we didn't want to go too far into the plot because it's such a good book, and
really good.
We really recommend you read it. It has been translated from another language. We're not entirely sure which. We think it might be Swedish or maybe Italian. It was a bit confusing about what language had been translated.
Yeah,
but it, despite being translated, which can really impact a book's how you comprehend a book. This was still very beautifully written. There were some points that were a bit...
Yeah, there were a couple of clunky, but very few.
Yeah.
But the translation was very... it wasn't just word for word. It was... You got a sense of meaning and nuance.
So what's interesting about this book is it is like a shifting restricted narrator. So we are seeing many, many different perspectives, but you only really see one perspective at once.
That's true. And I did find it a little confusing at times. I did lose track. If I wasn't concentrating, I did lose track as to who was actually narrating.
Yeah, there were points sometimes I was like, oh, hold on, who is it now? And so, because you're following these Norse gods as they're sort of coming out of their amnesia, but you're also following ordinary people as well. It felt a bit like if
there seemed to be quite a number of parallel stories that didn't quite. It wasn't clear that. I mean, yes, we know that they would cross over at some point, but they didn't. Not all of them did, or
they kind of
did, but it was
I think so. We're not explaining this well, but like these stories are all operating in parallel, and it's almost like you're just getting little clues from each one and slowly piecing things together.
It felt like a mystery.
Yeah, it really did.
Yeah, and no, they didn't all meet at once, but it was like, one story gave you a clue about another parallel story.
Yeah.
And then because of that, you understood another story or another point of view.
It must have taken a lot of plotting to make that work.
Yes.
I imagine there was a huge, whiteboard or corkboard
I'm
or something.
imagining lots and lots of post-it notes.
Yeah. And it doesn't sound like it would work, but it worked quite well.
It did, actually. Yeah.
There were moments where I was kind of like, oh, hold on, where am I? Or like, what's going on? And I had to reread a few pages occasionally, particularly at the beginning of a chapter, just to kind of get my bearings.
Yeah. But that happens with a lot of books. That's not necessarily a fault of the author. Like, we do read these in a hurry, so often it's user error.
But I think the other thing is, we as readers were discovering who these gods were at the same time. So they've got this collective amnesia.
Yeah, they were discovering who they were at the same time we were. That was really interesting. So I'm not sure why they were in an amnesic state.
So I have a theory.
I did look up. I thought, is this because? So I think the setting of the book is within Sweden and looking at Sweden's coronavirus response, but echoing it, or the parallel story, or shadowing it, is the idea of Ragnorok, which is the end of the world, which is a prophesied fate of these particular gods. It's a prophecy of these gods, and once it is triggered, it cannot be stopped. And I thought, maybe there's somewhere that there is something about them not remembering who they are, but I didn't get that sense.
I don't remember, not that I'm an expert on it, but I don't remember that from any of my reading of it. The thing that stood out to me as really interesting was there was, at a number of points, and particularly focusing on Tyr, the discussion of the last time they awoke like this was during the Nazi occupation of Sweden. And I have some interest in Germany and some interest in World War II history, but probably more so in the reunification of Germany is where my interest is, because that's when all the cool queer stuff started coming back. But this discussion of Sweden rewriting its history, and I knew some of the stories of the heroes who resisted the Nazis, but there appears to be this, from this author's perspective, this sentiment that Sweden wasn't a resistance force as they like to sell themselves, and that there were a few heroes who have sort of become
they come to represent the idea of Sweden.
Yeah. And that this is kind of a repeat of that, and that perhaps when we look back on this in 50 years' time, there will be those few resistors who resisted Sweden's herd immunity model, which has failed, and everyone admits it's failed.
Yeah, even the architects of it admit that it's failed, but it's still being used as an example of, as here's a phrase that we're all familiar with, living with COVID, which just means some people are dying of it. Can we just...
Yeah, well, exactly. It means that people that you don't think are important are dying of it.
Yeah.
And that's a really shitty position to take.
It's extremely shitty position to take. And it's, against a healthcare system that's just been ripped apart by neoliberalism, privatized and inadequate for this experiment to be done on Sweden's citizenship is appalling. That's my 2 cents worth. I have thoughts about it.
Yeah, and this is interesting because it's someone who, from what I understand, lived through this in Sweden.
I get the sense that they did,
and very much rejected the model the whole way. Well, they say the whole way through, and feels really betrayed and feels like they witnessed people not caring.
So are we talking about the author or the character?
The author.
Right, yes. Yes, witnessed people not caring.
Mm.
And there's a lot of criticism of this particular experiment, herd immunity experiment, and of the government's approach and of the government's amnesia, maybe is a good word. I don't know. Well, I feel like there's going to be an amnesia about the actual reality. Like you're talking about the resistors being perceived in the future as heroes. I suspect that what the people who are going to be seen as heroes in the future are the architects of this horrible experiment,
Really?
Because they'll have been, because most people, and I've read quite a few op-eds about this approach and watched horrible videos, news. ABC and other reputable news sources watch videos of people saying, "Oh, it's not that bad. Well, not even that bad." So there are these approaches, hand washing and social distancing were the primary ways to control, were the primary health measures in place rather than masks.
Yes, they didn't think it was airborne.
Yeah, even after it had been proven to be airborne. And look, I'm not the people who I read in these articles were saying things like, well, yes, some people got sick, but they were isolated or put into isolation, whatever, quarantine, and the rest of us could live our lives. So it was seen as, I think people are going to look back as a time. I mean, look, I'm generalizing and I hate doing it, but it seems as there's going to be some people who look at this point of time and realize that they weren't dreadfully inconvenienced, and that's
the thing they'll remember.
That's the thing they'll remember, and I think their businesses might have not failed. They didn't have to get the financial bolstering, or maybe they did get financial support from the government that enabled their businesses and livelihoods to continue. I think this approach, even though it's horrendous from a public health point of view and from a lives lost point of view.
Well, and almost like a utilitarian point of view. Yes, these people are dying, but do you know what? We have to sacrifice the weak for the strong to survive. And it's like, it's gross.
If herd immunity could be... Can I just say, if herd immunity could be gained by letting a disease rip through a population, wouldn't we all be naturally immune to smallpox and polio and influenza and whatever other disease that have been with humanity for centuries? Why aren't we immune to those? Why did it take until... why didn't it... vaccinations is what got us herd immunity. Nothing else. Nothing else.
Yeah. So I think about it, and like part of the argument for herd immunity is that some people will die.
Yeah.
And how do you not know someone who is likely to die if they get it and not feel like, well, I don't want to lose them? Because I can name 10 people.
And also there was still not, I mean, at that point in time, March, April last year. It's almost 500 years ago. April, May last year. Excuse me. Not enough was known about the disease to be able to say, well, herd immunity is possible.
It's a gamble. Like it was
an
like
absolute gamble.
We don't want to make like policy that is hard to sell.
Yeah. So
and it was easier to sell.
The idea that the idea that
we'll all be fine.
We'll all be fine, and people who get sick will be old people, and they're going to die anyway soon. So I mean, which is a position taken by too many people in Australia. And
my parents are like they're not, they're older, like they're over 70, and if they got it, they might die. Like they're meant to have another 20 years in their life at least.
My mum was thankfully now both my parents are vaccinated. My dad finally got his, but I suspect it was more to do with wanting to go to the pub than actually believing that there's novel coronavirus. It's a whole other discussion.
Look, whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes. I will not have these discussions.
No.
So,
What I would say is I think this story was very well crafted. And do you know what? I've been having this discussion a lot lately. There were points where I felt like the author was maybe going a bit hard or being a bit kind of... Like, I think about the Black Lives Matter part of the book, where there was this really, like, characters in the book, their views that they were taking were like, well, how irresponsible, and, you know, it's really performative, and, like, there are
aspects of
that I agree with.
Performative, yes.
But also, like, not recognizing the gravity and importance of what is, you know, systemic racism, and it's so complicated. And I think it's that thing of going, I can see where you're coming from, but also, like, it doesn't sit well with me that that's how you look at it. And so there were points that I didn't necessarily go, oh yeah, I'm 100% on board with you. But
it seemed as though he was being a bit critical of people that would have been on his side.
Yeah, and maybe a bit kind of, you know, everyone's wrong. You know, that thing where people
I'm the clever one.
Yes, yeah. And people kind of take this thing where it's like, I don't agree with anyone because everyone's wrong. It's like, well, you're never going to get anywhere with that argument. You've got to be able to go in and play the game that's being played in order to change the game that's being played.
Yeah. So I think I've just reached a section of the book where there's a research scientist, Daniela. She lets out, this isn't my excerpt, but she lets out a snort as she stares at the digital front page of the newspaper about the protesters. And it says, more out of incredulity. Oh, no.
Incredulity.
Incredulity. I hate it when I... So, more out of incredulity than diligence, the research scientist shares the news on Twitter where other profiles have already reported the headline with comments accounting for all viewpoints. There are those on one hand point out the folly of such huge groups convening while the infection rate is so high, and on the other hand there are those who only see the virtue of the Swedish people's solidarity, always ready to defend a just cause. I felt like that was a bit of a not I don't know.
Here's the thing, like
mocking.
I recognise the kind of, particularly in somewhere like Sweden, where they weren't practicing proper protection.
No.
That, you know, there was like, but like the criticism isn't that they're supporting Black Lives Matter. The criticism needs to be that they're so flippant with their own lives.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And it feels misplaced. But also, like, that's a character's perspective, and maybe he was trying to sort of put that forward. Maybe that's something that he saw. Yeah. Because, you know, very online people, I saw it the other day.
Very online people. I feel like I'm an online person, but
No, but the people who, like, if someone says something and I just go, I don't think you're talking in good faith, I just disengage. Like, I just go, I don't...
Oh, no, but there are people who...
There are people who just can't let it go. They're like, no, you have to agree with me. Like, you...
Well, they have to make a comment publicly or, like, re-quote or tweet. I was like, who cares? What the hell does it matter if you have an opinion on an American politician's point?
Do you know what the one that's really bothered me lately is seeing on, like...
What's their at?
No. This is like a broad kind of... Right. And often, like, proper anonymous accounts, like first name, much number accounts, or, like, just gobbledygook accounts. That someone would be like, look, I'm a bit sick of hearing all this Taylor Swift because, you know, she's done her Taylor's version and it's everywhere. And then on, like, Twitter, these people just... hundreds and like the same person will reply 200 times, you're fucking ugly, you should die, Taylor Swift is the best thing ever, how dare you. And it's like, Taylor Swift doesn't need you to protect her. She's fine. Like, she's
absolutely
very happy millionaire.
fine.
She's like, and good on her, she's re-recording her music because someone sold the masters or whatever it was, and she's reclaiming ownership of her music, and you bought it, good for you, you're supporting her. No one else needs to do that. Like, it's not your job to defend someone who's like, oh, I'm a bit sick of this, or she's not for me. She's not for everyone. And if someone says that...
God, that's why there's so much different music, because, God, if we all like the same thing, Oh, God. No, horrible.
It's that thing of like, if someone doesn't like that your favorite artist, that's some
Just
like
fine.
music is literally one of the things that you can just have an opinion on. Like, you don't need any expertise. You just like what you like, and you don't like what you don't like, and that's fine. And you know what? Maybe that person didn't like. I mean, I think it's fine to say, "Oh my God, I'm hearing so much Taylor Swift," because it was everywhere. But also, like, maybe that person didn't really need to say they didn't like Taylor Swift. But also, why are you responding to them?
Yeah.
My litmus test is like, if you were to go up to Taylor Swift and explain to her in detail what you did in her defense, would she call security?
Absolutely, she would. Call
And if the answer
security.
is yes, and the answer is always yes,
Always. But these people are not that self-aware. But I mean, but I do have a problem with, and we're really off topic now, but this idea of I don't say idolatry. That's not the right word. But idolizing anyone to that extent where you feel the need to defend them in every public sphere, and you know, we probably weeping. Although, do you remember Leave Britney Alone?
Yeah, he was entirely right. Chris Crocker.
So vindicated.
Yeah. No, but it's that you shouldn't agree with anyone on 100% of things. And very online people tend to be like, you're either in my camp and these people's camp.
It's extremely binary, isn't it?
And it's like, sometimes I see things, people who I agree with on like a good 85 to 90% of what they say. And there are days I look at them and I just go, I'm just going to mute you for a day because you're on a tear about something that I think is maybe A, not important, B, you've kind of got the wrong end of the stick. And I'm just...
Or even, well, for me, C, not important to them. And I will make that judgment. Anyway, so should we...
What I think... What you just talked about is probably a good lead into my excerpt because it is from the husband of that. So that was Daniela.
Yes.
This is her husband, Federico. And it's they're from Italy. She's a research scientist and he's a teacher. And they're thinking about returning to Italy.
Yes.
And this is something that I think kind of captured the sort of Swedish culture from an outsider's perspective that I think maybe helped me click into what this is like.
Yep.
So this is Federico thinking about going home to Italy. Returning to the epicenter of the contagion in Italy would have seemed crazy to them just 4 months earlier. But now they were convinced that it was the best thing to do. Cases were falling at the same rate as they were rising in Sweden. And there was no longer any doubt in their minds that the government of their adopted country would continue to charge at the acquisition of herd immunity, whatever the cost. In Swedish, there is an expression that is part of the essence of their society, lagom. A difficult word to translate. It means something like, in the right measure, just enough to be right without standing out due to excess or defect. Daniela called Sweden's strategy lagom denial.
Oh.
And I thought that was kind of perfectly captured. Like maybe the place that the Swedish sort of culture and people were coming from of like, you know, we have to do this. It feels like a very utilitarian, like just the right amount to like get the job done.
Yeah.
And this person who lives within that culture but comes from outside that culture is able to look at that and say, no, it's to excess and defect now, and you're denying that you've hit that threshold. And I thought it was a really nice insight into sort of somewhere that I don't live, have never lived in, don't necessarily understand.
Yep.
And kind of helped me kind of connect with, or maybe this is where the sort of strong support for this thing that everyone from the outside looking in is going, what are you doing?
It seemed literally insane. I don't know, there's something about the frog slowly being boiled in water aspect to it. It's like, it seems right because they're on the inside and it seems right. And maybe that's down to government messaging, what was being presented in the news as correct, and the version of correct is just a bit askew from other versions of correct.
Yeah, do you know, like I thought about people who think that Australia is being oppressed, and I was like, are we frogs in the water? Like,
are we?
I don't know. Like,
there's a
we
part
all
of
hated lockdown.
hated it, but we understood it.
Yeah.
And it had, well, I mean, maybe this is different because our strategy this year hinged upon vaccination levels, which are as of today, 91.4% of everyone over 12 in Victoria, which is fully vaccinated. So thank you, everyone. It's making society safer. But last year, without vaccinations, lockdown was a tool that was used to great effect. Like, we got down to 0 cases.
Yeah.
As an elimination strategy, it worked.
And like,
How many lives did that save?
Like thousands. And I think we understand that elimination is not possible forever.
No.
And now that vaccinations are here, we're now at a point where we're like, well, we know that we have to move forward. I think that's a really good place to be.
And now we need to vaccinate the rest of the world.
Yes, and that's
a whole other thing. Yeah. Where are you, HWO? No, you've done it again.
Throwback to the last time we had to talk about the Who.
Listen to episode 13 or 12. I don't know. Oh, why can't I spell today? WHO, World Health Organization. Get you fucking act into whatever. Oh, can you just delete this whole bit?
So, the story is the gods are waking up, and I don't want to give too much away, but there is sort of a general. There is and the author writes a sort of acknowledgement thing at the end where they talk about how there's no while all the news stories and all the events that happen outside of the gods are sort of are real and based on what was being reported in the Swedish media. There's no demigod media mogul who's controlling this message necessarily, but it kind of represents that the dark art that is the media kind of pushing this line. And I found it interesting because I feel like we look at that and go, oh yeah, I feel like that's a thing that's happening. But, if someone comes to us and says we don't trust the mainstream media because, lizard people, and it did make me think, how do you draw that line? I read that and went, that feels like that's sort of something that's real and happening. And, it's obviously not playing. It's not the Loki, the god of mischief. It's all these people who are kind of working in all these bureaucracies and media organizations and lobbying groups and all these other things are all kind of working towards these things. And it's very complicated, but there does feel like in Sweden that they were very kind of on board with this message and they were not willing to admit the failures of what was happening.
And maybe there were some failures. I mean, that actually leads into my excerpt 2.0, because I can't find the original one, about this. Oh no, I've lost it again.
Do you want a second?
Oh no, here we go. And it's about how news about within Sweden, news about the health approach taken. So this is from the man they call Gudmason reviews the headline. So he is looking at a newspaper. It's called Newsbladet. That's probably absolutely not how it's pronounced, but that's how I'm pronouncing it. There's another headline about the German journalist today. Maybe it's time to stop talking about this guy. It was funnier at the beginning of April when the novel virus had only claimed around 1,000 lives. I mean, what the hell? That was early on.
Only
1,000.
Hell.
And the foreign journalist, also foreign journalist, so there's already an outsider, was asking at every daily press conference why Sweden wasn't adjusting its strategy as the UK and the Netherlands had done. The guy seemed tireless every single day. After the Swedish Health Agency's briefing, he asked the same question without fail, a lone voice of dissent in the face of rising statistics, hiding behind a smokescreen of science and a mask of hope. A strange black sheep that, by merely bleating against the others, was already disrupting the herd immunity promised. And then he goes on to, there's another headline addresses this topic head on. Most of Stockholm's population is expected to have reached herd immunity by May. This will be a good article. It will look great after the chicken shit one. And then as as the book goes on, that headline changes, or that news changes about when herd immunity is going to be reached. By June, by August, it just presents itself over and over again as a failed strategy, and that the dissenting voice is really important, but not listened to.
Yeah. It's funny because it gives me a sense of someone, because, that wasn't our experience. We were watching that. We were watching our press conferences. And
I can hardly think of them anymore.
But imagine if, I look at that perspective and I think about the people who didn't think lockdowns were a good idea, and that one journalist from the Hun or whatever it was who was the kind of lone voice of dissent. And is that how they felt? Not that I'm not
no, I understand, but I understand.
I read that and I go, oh, that's how I would have felt. But is that how those people in Australia felt?
God, maybe, because look, there's this whole section. I mean, and I'm going to refer to my father again. He has been led to believe by whatever he's reading and listening to on certain news channels that COVID isn't as bad as it actually is. That it's a bit of a scam. That the vaccines are terrible. We shouldn't be mandated. The current range of criticisms out there. Oh,
I guess is he someone who's in that headspace?
Yeah, so he is in that headspace, and from his perspective, he is seeing and hearing truth. And from my perspective, which is the polar opposite, I am seeing and hearing and believing truth. And I think that dissenting voice, I mean, I'm going to put aside my cynicism and say perhaps, yes, they do believe that they are the dissenting voice. But
I think where I'm going with this, so one of the big problems we have in the world at the moment is digital information literacy. And I teach at a university, and one of the big things I teach is digital information literacy, how to look at something and even when it is a credible source, to be able to then see the biases that exist, to see, if it's a news organization, understanding that news organizations are for profit, and how does their editorial policy help them manage against what their profit interests are. If it's an independent news source, how are they making money? What are their biases? Who are they interviewing? What are the expertise of those people? And it's not wrong to criticize reporting. There is going to be reporting from credible organizations
and it's not wrong to be a reporter who criticizes government or
exactly.
And I mean that's the actual point of that.
But our problem is, and it's for people who support our side as well as people who are not who don't believe that COVID is real. Digital information literacy is the lacking factor. If you read something, and you can't do it for every single thing, but if I read something and my gut goes, something doesn't feel right there, I have to make a decision. Do I want to chase that down the rabbit holes, and there will be many, and it'll take me a few hours?
Yeah.
Or do I want to sort of file that in I'm not sure how correct this is, and I'm not going to go around repeating that information until I know how correct it is. And people are not willing to make that assessment and hold back, because everything, very online people, want to be winning arguments all the time and feel like they need to weigh in on everything. And I used to be like that. I used to go, oh, this person said something and they're on the opposite side of politics to me, and I have to argue. No, I don't.
I mean, look, I wasn't going to talk about my dad, but I'm going to. He picks fights with me about all of this. He's convinced that I live under a dictatorship. And it's extremely frustrating. It's like, oh my God. And part of me puts it down to, lack of digital information literacy, and also from a generation where the news was a trusted source. And so when he gets news in from, say, the Herald Sun or Sky or whatever, wherever, from seemingly legitimate news sources that promote this point of view that is anti-health or anti-government and anti-health measure, why wouldn't he believe that? And this is where my absolute fury with the federal government comes into play, but we'll just let that go again.
Yeah. It just, I don't know, reading this, I think for probably one of the first times, I was like, here's somebody who is in a position where the government, not that the government always has their interests at heart or anything like that, but in this instance with this pandemic, I was watching these lockdowns and I was like, I hate them, they suck, but like I don't see another path that is viable
until we get vaccinations, and that wasn't a certainty 12 months ago.
Yeah.
And so elimination seemed the only strategy.
And so
because herd immunity doesn't exist without it.
Seeing someone who's in a country where they are sharing my position on this, but they're looking at the government going, I'm looking at what you're doing and it's like,
I think it's wrong.
And I just think this is the first thing that's made me go, I can kind of see the perspective of someone who isn't consuming the same things that I am, isn't in the same bubble that I'm in, but also, and like, this is not a brag, but like I have incredibly good digital information literacy because I teach it. I understand numerous models for how to assess the credibility of sources. I'm
extremely cynical and I just don't believe something.
And I look at it.
I'm also extremely gullible, so I have to be really, it's a bit of a check and balance against myself.
Yeah, I just look at it and I go, for the first time, I can kind of feel where they were coming from, because somebody who, if I was in that country, would be sitting there going, I feel like everyone's lying to me. And I feel like maybe this is where these people feel like the information they get.
I think they do. I think they really do.
But
and it's really unfortunate. And I don't know what we can do. I mean, because they're thinking the same thing about me. Like, oh my goodness, you're brainwashed. You're just being a sheep.
And here's the thing, like in a university setting, it's not my job to tell a student, hey, this opinion's right, this opinion's wrong.
No, you're not to tell them what to think.
My job is to teach them how to how to research and how to build an argument, and what they do with it is what they do with it. But yeah, sorry, this is very off topic.
This is really off topic. I don't know that we're going to get much laughing done today, but I did find a really interesting snippet in my research. So, because this book does touch on, echoes the idea of Ragnarok as the end of the world, and but because it's cyclical, there is hope built into that, and that's very nice. And I did get that sense from this book that there was, even though dreadful things were happening, the hope that was part of the prophecy or fated to be was seen and recognised and understood by those people or those gods experiencing, everything. So this is a really lovely book. We'll definitely
highly recommend that you do read this book. I feel like we haven't done it justice.
We've done it zero
very
justice.
Distracted.
Yes, I'll give this book more masks out of 5 than I give myself.
Yes, it was. We should probably start to wrap up.
I think we should.
But it was.
It's dark out.
It's dark outside. It was a really well-crafted story in a way that I just look at it and I think...
I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. Maybe enjoy was... Intellectually, I really responded to it.
Yeah, and it's this thing of like fantasy as a... That's the blinds. Fantasy as I guess it's fantasy, but this kind of mythology theme. Like, I look at that and go, you wrote that in... Like, very recently... Sorry, Stella's just come to join us, so you may hear her grunting. Like, you wrote that very quickly and a very complicated story that worked. And I look at it and think there's so many ways it could have gone wrong.
It was published in September or October last year. Yeah. So that was done. It was done pretty quickly. I imagine there would have been a lot of emotion because there was lots of anger in this book. Yeah, and John, that's probably the one sort of warning I'd say going into it is that you will feel like I relived a lot of frustration and anger that I felt in 2020 in reading this book. Yeah. I mean, look, here's a line. Because I think Sweden was one of the first countries that had assisted
It is.
dying.
Yes. Oh, yes, I know.
So and so there's reference to euthanasia means ending a sick and incurable life to reduce suffering, which yes, we can all agree is a.
We're just going to
good
wait
thing.
for Stella to stop drinking.
Oh my lord, that is quite loud. Thirsty there, Stella. All right, so euthanasia means ending a sick and incurable life to reduce suffering. Very good. For someone whose sentencing comes down to a lack of resources, someone who was not asked to end up like this, another word is certainly needed. When words are lacking, the best thing to do is to paraphrase, to open the door of language and to look for the nearest fire escape, to run thinking more about semiotics than semantics, so that no one can later point to the word that's actually lingering on the lips. Thus, the man's death will not be assisted. They will simply do what they can do to ease his pain with painkillers. And that was a criticism that's echoed a few times throughout this book of the Swedish health response and the Swedish.
But also, so recently in America, some hospitals have had to either consider or actually go to crisis standards of care, where you are no longer treated on who needs the most urgent help. You are treated on who will survive.
Yeah.
And that is because there are not like.
And you know who wears that? It's the nurses. It's the nurses. It's the hospital staff. It's doctors making that call at the point that these people present to hospital.
And if like
devastating thing to do to
I just
their
think
own citizens.
and I think of doctors and nurses who have like wrecked from watching people die. Like that has been like in a way that their jobs have. If you work in an emergency ward, your job involves death, but in a way and a volume that they have never had to experience before,
and fearing for their own lives.
Yeah, and then the next step is to not just watch people die, but have some people come in and say, "Well, you're going to die because we can't help you." Like previously, they would say, "I will do everything in my power to help you," and now I have to say, well, now a nurse or a doctor has to say, "I can't help you."
Yeah, I mean that.
Like that's psychologically damaging to someone who's committed their life to saving, like to helping people.
And those conversations that nurses and doctors are having with people within ICUs or intensive care. In Australia and other countries, it's not just one country, where they ask for the vaccination, and it's too late. You've got COVID. You're about to be intubated. You cannot vaccinate you.
It wouldn't work.
It would have no effect. And your immune system would probably just
wouldn't handle the thing going in.
Would not handle.
You need to be healthy to get vaccinated. You need to be like.
You need to not have COVID.
Yeah. Your immune system needs to be
able to
not busy trying to fight something already in you.
Anyway.
Yeah. Sorry, this is a bit of a downer episode.
But should we? Well, then, given that it has been a bit of a downer, should we give them a bit of a clue about what we're doing next year? Or
well, we have picked a topic. Would you like to share what our topic is?
Let's go to.
Or should we rate this first?
Oh yeah, let's rate this. I'm going to give it 4 out of 5. I think it was so a great story, well written. I feel like I learned a lot, and it prompted me to go do more reading. I really enjoyed it. Maybe 4.5 stars, I think.
Yeah, I was going to push to 4.5. Similar to you, like I knew I had done some reading and I had listened to some very good reporting on the situation in Sweden, but I certainly didn't understand what it felt like.
No.
And I feel like this gave me an insight into that.
That's true, yeah.
And what I'd say is like there are moments in this where I feel like, there is a lot of emotion, and sometimes I think that affects the kind of quality of the argument that he's making. However, like also
but it's his
perspective, it's his story, and it's not really our place to kind of say, your story is not valid.
No, and I think emotion doesn't take away from the reality of the story.
It was very well researched. Like I spot checked some of the stuff that he was talking about, because he says, outside of what happened with the gods, this was the stories that I talk about, the things that happened to these people were real, and they were, and that was really clear all the way through. That he was being very careful to, within the prism of this mythology, not commit hyperbole. Like,
No, that's true. It was, but it was interwoven very neatly. There was a sense of, but it wasn't a clunky mishmash of
the Valkyries were not
mythology and-
murdering like powerful men in strip clubs.
No, they
We
weren't.
understand that wasn't happening. But the news about COVID deaths and the shifting narrative of that herd immunity kind of goal absolutely was happening. And the way he maps it is the way that it plays out. I'm 4.5. It was really interesting and well worth reading. And I think if it's something you want to visit, it's well worth visiting.
Yep, absolutely it is. We will paste the link into one of our socials.
Yes.
One of our socials at Lowbrow Lowdown.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So we will introduce what our next topic is, but firstly, tell us what you think. You can email us at lowbrowlowdown@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter at lowbrowlowdown and share your thoughts. And if you read the book, to let us know what you think of it. We thought it was a really excellent book and really well crafted.
Season 2.
Season 2.
We are doing a season 2. That is amazing.
I can't believe we got through a season 1.
I can't believe it either. And we did not get to the end of all of the COVID books that we had bookmarked.
No, we've got a couple more to come.
Got a couple more to come. They will be Christmassy in theme and more hilarious than this one.
Yeah. I feel like this was an important one, but also very dour
it was a bit
for our theme.
quite dour. So season 1, as you all know, it's all about pandemic prose. We looked at the self-published literature of coronavirus COVID-19. Season 2, we are moving away from the pandemic because it's exhausting on a number of levels. And we are going to explore the hypothesis that zombie movies, TV series and books provide us with a snapshot of culture and society at the time of their creation. We will explore the zeitgeist through a trashy undead lens.
I'm really excited for this. So
we'll reveal the name of it next week.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
We're still doing our focus group testing. If you'd like to be in our focus group, if you email us before Tuesday next week, we'd be happy to consider your thoughts. We can send you some stuff.
Yeah.
So
Tuesday,
email us
the
at
13th
lowbrowlowdown@gmail.com.
What's the date next Tuesday? 14th of
14th,
December.
yeah.
No, that would be great because the same 3 people in our lives. I'm a bit sick of seeing this shit. But very exciting. Zombie movies.
Yeah, well, so we both love zombie films and the genre in general.
Yes.
And I don't think we realised exactly how much we both loved this until we started doing this.
No, that's right. And I think it was in the context, well, for me, it was in the context of pandemic escapism. It was like, oh no, it just got me through the pandemic, just watching dreadful zombie series.
Whereas I'd be like, my entire life since I was a teenager has been like
Damien is very passionate about the undead. Oh wait, no. So creepy.
Oh, like if I ever need a Tinder profile, passionate about the undead.
Oh my god. Disgusting.
No one's responded.
Anyway, we are done.
We're done. Stella joined for the last part of that.
Yeah, very nice. Good work, Stella. See you next week. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See ya. Bye.